Hello, I'm Gavin Lee and welcome to this week's edition of The World This Week. I'm joined as ever by a panel of distinguished correspondents who will be assessing the latest state of play in global affairs in a week that's marked 4 years of war in Ukraine. It was a silent, subdued ceremony in Kyiv's Independence Square with flowers and candles to honour the fallen. 9 European leaders were there to show solidarity, but there's no end in sight. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians have died. At least 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers, according to the government, many more missing, presumed dead in the so-called kill zone. In the east, where Russia's annexed roughly 20% of the country, the front line that once resembled the trench warfare of bygone world wars has been transformed by technology into an expanded area, often miles wide, where drones now dominate the battlefield. Open source intelligence estimates Russia has lost as many as 325,000 soldiers.
Dear people, the strength that has sustained us all these years is you, our people. Our resistance is you, Ukrainian men, Ukrainian women. Everyone does not give up.
It's been a week where President Trump delivered the longest State of the Union address on record, coming in at 1 hour 47 minutes. He boasted a, quote, roaring economy, record stock market highs and lower inflation and gas prices compared to the Biden era. The border, he said, was stronger than ever, the most secure in American history, a speech peppered with at least 60 superlatives and plenty of showmanship that saw him bring out the Olympic gold medal-winning USA ice hockey team. And with the familiar rhetoric of foreign policy scant on any new detail, this was a best-of compilation. And on his immigration policy, sitting Democrats became sitting ducks as he posed a doozy of a question.
If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself.
It's a week where Bill and Hillary Clinton testified in a private hearing about what exactly they knew about the life and crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. The former US Secretary of State said she had no information, doesn't recall ever meeting him, accusing the Republican-led House Oversight Committee of partisan political theatre and calling on them to request that Donald Trump testifies, and asked why the private hearing couldn't be held in public. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, appears prominently in a batch of recently released Epstein files with heavily redacted photos of him in a swimming pool alongside the convicted paedophile Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. He also travelled several times on Epstein's private jet, although neither of the Clintons are accused of any wrongdoing. She spoke to reporters afterwards.
Can I ask, why was Ghislaine Maxwell invited to your daughter Chelsea Clinton's wedding in 2010? She'd already been mentioned in a civil lawsuit by Virginia Giuffre before that. Jeffrey Epstein had already been convicted before that.
She came as the +1, the guest of someone who was invited.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Meanwhile, there was a second high-profile arrest in the space of a week in the UK in connection with Epstein. The first, captured in that unforgettable image by Reuters photographer Phil Noble of a wide-eyed, seemingly terrified Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor leaving the police station by car. The arrest of the former US ambassador Peter Mandelson came next, both accused of passing confidential market-sensitive government information to the convicted child sex offender. They both deny. The arrest of Mandelson came over claims he may have been preparing to leave the country. The British Parliamentary Speaker Lindsay Hoyle confirmed that he was the one to tip off police.
I'd like to confirm that upon receipt of information that I felt it was relevant, I passed this on to the Metropolitan Police in good faith, as is my duty and responsibility.
OK, it's time to meet the panellists. With me in the studio, we have a great friend of the Prozac programme, Bozu Daragahi, independent journalist, 3 times Pulitzer Prize finalist, author too of the Substack Badlands. It is great to have you with us, Bozu.
Thank you.
I want to mention something that, in the triage of big news, doesn't often get looked at. Is something going on this week. There's a clash between Anthropic, the AI company, and the US government. It's an ethical clash, it seems. What's going on at the heart of that?
Oh, that's a very interesting story that's happening right now. You have this company, it's an AI startup backed by Amazon called Anthropic, and they basically have demanded that the Pentagon, which is one of their main clients, and that is something really interesting and noteworthy in the whole AI space. A lot of their clients are military. They want a commitment from the military that the AI that they are using won't be used for two things: for domestic mass surveillance of Americans and for autonomous warfare. And they said that until they get those commitments, they can't provide their technology to the Pentagon anymore. And there was a big statement by the CEO of the company, of Anthropic, saying this and explaining its position, and also detailing all the work they have been doing for the military and for the intelligence agencies, he notes. And then you had this statement coming out from a Pentagon spokesman saying essentially, we have not asked them to do anything illegal. We basically want a commitment that we will do nothing that is illegal. Regardless of, and the underlying word there is unethical, which is he doesn't mention. And they have until 5 p.m. today Eastern time to buckle, so in a few hours, or they lose all their Pentagon contracts.
But it's also interesting because you compare that with what's been going on at the bigger company, Palantir, named after the Tolkien stepping stones of Lord of the Rings, to which Alex Karp, its boss, has basically been saying it's an ideological.
He's enthusiastic. Yeah.
Yes, he wants to. He said before, defend the West. He's just signed a contract with the military
and kill people. He said he was quite public about saying that. Yeah. So yes, there's a different attitude there in other parts of the AI space.
Well, we've invited Alex Karp onto the programme. We hope he joins us soon. The invite is still there about the company. There's a lot of scrutiny this week. Financial Times calling for more scrutiny on the company, which have contracts, not just British military, the US military, but also the British NHS, French Airbus bus company as well. So we will look at that. But it's great to have you, Bozu, with us tonight. Let's move elsewhere. Let's go to Brussels. Let's bring in Joachim Clementi, Europe correspondent for the Estonian public broadcaster ERR. Ersti Rafus Arang Hurling. Joachim, I think I got that almost right, pronunciation. It is fantastic to have you with us again. Tell us about your week and what you've been working on.
Well, I've just finished a small report on climate policy and European competitiveness. It seems kind of a highly technical issue. We're talking a lot about the emissions trading system, which is basically a system where European industry pays for the carbon they emit when they produce electricity, for example, or other things. But it's very interesting that such a technical issue has really become kind of a focal point back home in Estonia and in European politics more widely. I think we see some ground shifting. The Italians have just come out yesterday saying that this whole system needs to be put on hold and cancelled for the time where we figure out how to reform it, to make sure that we're essentially not shooting ourselves in the foot when we are, trying to make sure we don't hurt the climate, but are allowing our companies to compete on the world stage. So it's been a very kind of interesting issue lately when it comes to how do we make sure that Europe has the economic power to make sure that we have the military power to be a player on the world stage.
Something else we might have missed this week, Joachim, but you can take us into this world. It was Estonian National Day, wasn't it? The anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 1918. I've got a question for you. As well as the military parades that is there, there's a standout dish, I'm told, that Estonians must eat, which is called kulevoileib. It's a sprat sandwich. What is it?
Let me help you.
Yes.
Kiluvõileib, which I think in English it's a sprout sandwich. So it's rye bread, which we eat in Estonia, not this bread you're used to in France, or Belgium, where you have made from wheat, but made from rye. And on top of that, you have sprout, and it's a very traditional kind of Estonian dish we like to eat during our Independence Day, and maybe not in moderation, a little shot of vodka by the side, and we celebrate our colors and celebrate the fact that 100 years ago, 180 years ago, we beat the Soviet Union, then Russia, in our war of independence. So it is possible, if you stand up for your freedom, to actually get freedom. I think that's also a sign that we should hold out hope for the Ukrainians.
Brilliant to have you with us tonight. Let's move up the E19 and the A1. Let's go from Brussels to Antwerp. Let's bring in Toon Voeten, award-winning Dutch war photojournalist, writer, cultural anthropologist who's covered conflicts in Haiti, Iraq, Syria, Rwanda, the Balkans, child soldiers in Sierra Leone, Mexico's drug cartels, and for the past 2 years, the fentanyl crisis in the US. Welcome to the panel, Toon. Let's start with, by way of introduction, you're working on a book called The Silent Killer on the West Coast, and you've embedded yourself in doing this on the streets to document the human impacts of it all. Tell us about what you've found.
Well, in 2009, I arrived in Mexico to photograph the drug war. I found a level of violence and cruelty and impunity that I only had witnessed before in so-called uncivil wars in Sierra Leone, Angola, Liberia, Afghanistan, post-Soviet. But at the same time, Mexico is a very civilized, cultured country, and it was very strange for me to see this level of insanity in a civilized country. I went back several times. Eventually, I made a photo book, but I found it so interesting. I made a PhD on the Mexican drug violence. I focused on, first of all, what kind of war it is. It is a war, and I call it hybrid warfare. You can compare it with the war that ISIS is waging against the West. It's very, it's at all levels. It's unpredictable. I also analyzed the conflict from an economic point of view. I analyzed the cartels as ultra-capitalist, as predatory capitalist corporations, very interesting, who use the same tactics and approach as ordinary corporations. Only they use violence, but in a very selective way. And at last, I looked at the logic of cruelty, how people can commit the most atrocious acts, ultra-violence. And I refrained from calling the perpetrators animals, irrational animals. I said, listen, this ultra-violence is a rational strategy to impose order, to make propaganda, to intimidate opponents, and also as a recruitment strategy. So that's basically where I focused on. After that, I focused on the drug violence in Antwerp. I wrote a book about crystal meth. Also, Mexico is a big producer of crystal meth, and currently I'm writing a book on fentanyl. At this moment, the most horrible drug has taken the lives of nearly 400,000 people in the US, and also Mexico is responsible for producing the fentanyl with the help of China, which is trafficking in precursor chemicals to Mexico. It's a very complicated story. But I talk to many addicts on the streets. I do research on policy of city governments.
Yes.
And I researched U.S. policy and how Trump is trying to curtail the cartels.
Well, Toon, we will look into that in more detail. It's great to have you with us as well tonight. Let's head from Antwerp to Washington, D.C. Let's welcome Ina Stradzina, the Foreign Affairs Editor at Latvian Public Broadcaster, LTV. It is great to see you, Ina. Great to have you back with us on the programme too. You've just finished broadcasting Latvian TV today. You've come to talk to us tonight, so thank you. Tell us about what you've been covering this week.
Hi, Gavin. Very, very nice. Very happy to see you again. And of course, I remember our wonderful Brussels times. Yes, this week, very, very busy here in Washington. Of course, the main stories we are following, as every journalist here, what's going on with Epstein files, what's going on with Iran. And for me personally, this week also was full of official visits here from Latvia, high-level visits. And in this time, when we are still in Russia's war in Ukraine, it's very much felt also here in the States. And our politicians try to come here to convince and to tell American counterparts about the situation in the Baltics, that we need security, we are NATO member state, but still we want to be sure that the United States is with us, and also we need economical cooperation and cooperation in energy sphere. So there are a lot of things which our side is willing to develop with American side, and of course,
No, we will look at that when we get to Ukraine. It is great to have you with us. A quick question to you, going back to what Joachim said on the Estonians eating, I think it's kilu voileib. We'll get a pronunciation from Joachim. Is there a Latvian equivalent, a rival of this sprat sandwich?
Actually, we do eat sprats, and this is something we are taking as a present also when we go somewhere abroad. Maybe not so typical as our Estonian friends, but yeah, we do like sprats. This is one of our most popular food, yeah. So we do eat, yes.
Thumbs up to Sprats. Great to have you with us let's begin, 8:30. Tuesday morning in Ukraine. That's when President Zelensky released an address to the nation on social media marking 4 years of war and resistance to Russia's initial plan to take the capital in 3 days. Zelensky started in the same chair, the same office, the same underground bunker on Bankova Street in Kyiv, where he sat on the 24th of February 2022, uttering reportedly a phrase that illustrates his wartime leadership in response to President Biden's offer to evacuate him. Quote, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Ever aware of the importance of optics, the president offered a new perspective on what was going on back then.
Much was done here. We had never shown this facility before. It's empty now, of course. But at the beginning of the war, there were hundreds of people here. I worked here. Then we went upstairs to address you, the people. Here was our team, the government, daily coordination, phone calls, the search for solutions, everything necessary for Ukraine to endure.
At 8:30 on that morning in 2022, convoys of Russian tanks, troops and equipment were advancing towards Kyiv, but the fight back was already underway. Ukrainian forces blowing up key bridges to stop the encirclement, slowing and repelling the invasion and stopping the airborne special forces from landing, the start of their tactical defence around Kyiv. There were some of the headlines, let's show you some actually, on the week that the full-scale war broke out. Putin invades, says The Guardian. We also saw from the Daily Mail, Putin to seize the capital in days, it said. Well, much of the West has rallied since to Ukraine's cause, although there's a wider debate on the speed, the scale of that support, the question of whether acting earlier and faster would have stopped the Russians entrenching in the east. In terms of spending, Europe now accounts for the largest share of total military and humanitarian aid. The US reductions under President Trump saw Washington also briefly pause intelligence sharing last year to pressurise Kyiv towards their idea of peace negotiations. And that pressure hasn't gone away. US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff saying this week it is a silly war. And President Trump has said he wants a deal by summer ahead of the US midterms. Joachim, let me first come to you. President Zelensky here in Paris. While the Olympics were on last year, you interviewed him. Can you tell us what you took away from that, and also from looking at him then to now this week, the wartime leader of Ukraine?
Well, I think what's most amazing about Zelensky is just the fact that you can see when you're talking to him or when you see his performances on TV, even after these 4 years, you see that there is still fight in him. And without such a leader, I think, at the start of the war, there were many predictions. The Russians thought that, it would be over in 3 days. I got to say, the European allies sometimes also thought that the Ukrainians didn't have as much fight in them. But, when I talked to Zelensky, the primary impression I got from him is, even though if you look at his press conferences, sometimes you wonder, how does he keep it up? How is he not tired? Every time he's kind of vocalizing the fact that, hey, I am young, I'm virile, I have the nation of Ukraine behind me, we are fighting, we are not asking you to fight for us, we're just asking you to help us fight. And, if you compare that to Putin, who's sitting in his bunkers and kind of isolating, the Ukrainians and Zelensky have always been saying that if you're going to bet on somebody, you bet on the guy who shows some life, shows some fire. And, this classic quote, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. I think we are in the same space right now. Sure, the Americans are not giving aid anymore. It's funded by the Europeans. But the real question is, the Ukrainians are proving still after 4 years of full-scale war that there's still fight in them. and they are asking for our help just to give them bullets, really.
Resistance, a key word, despite what Ukrainians are going through, and despite the fact that it has not been easy, and there's been a coming and going of political faces, a political landscape in Europe and the US too, and you've seen this you've reported from Ukraine back and forth over the past 4 years on the technological transformation as well. I want to ask you about that. This sort of trenches giving way to foxholes, no man's land now a wider kill zone, the drone warfare we're seeing. What's your sense of how the front lines have changed?
I think the amazing thing is that Ukraine is so strong that in these 4 years, actually Russia couldn't advance much. It has taken some territories in the eastern part, but really these are not significant that they wouldn't change Ukraine's faith. But of course, situation is very, very difficult, and soldiers are very tired, and people are super tired also in the cities, being shelled absolutely every single day. And this situation is really shame, I think, for us, the Western world, that in these 4 years we haven't been able to stop Putin, to stop this terrible war, and to get these peace negotiations where they should be. So yeah, I think Ukraine is struggling. The analysis are that this year will be still war year, and there is no any signal that there would be some results, some good outcome for Ukraine till the summer, and not maybe also till the end of the year. So yeah, situation is very, very, very bad.
Also listening to in a Euro to Prescient editorial in The Independent on the day before, I think the invasion, on the possible humanitarian consequences. You were at the border with Hungary and you stayed there for the week. You also talked about President Putin, how he would use refugees to destabilise other nations. How do you reflect on that now?
I think they definitely tried. I mean, they definitely tried to destabilize Europe in many different ways, including gray zone type cybernetic warfare, information operations. They did, and I think to Europe's credit, they still welcome Ukrainian refugees. There is no hostility. They didn't turn against them. But, you know, that was indeed one of the things that Russia had in its arsenal of destabilization, is creating wars. And other countries do this too. And right now in Eurasia, there's other powers create wars in order to destabilize your enemies by destabilizing the refugee flows.
I'll also pick up on something you wrote 2 days after, which is you talked about Western hunger for Russian gas, Putin's central bank accumulating a record $630 billion in foreign reserves at the time, turning a blind eye, you said, to human rights violations and crackdowns. Imports of Russian gas and oil imports in Europe are not zero, but they've reduced a lot.
They've reduced a lot, and it's to their credit. There is still some holdouts in terms of punishing Russia economically, with Hungary refusing to abide by these proposed sanctions, fresh round of sanctions. But look, I think more broadly, this is, I wonder if the world is getting somewhat tired of this at this point. It's been 4 years. It is a, grueling war of attrition. I think, I interviewed a scholar, a Ukrainian scholar this week, and I asked him what would be the, the ugliest terms that you would accept, and that the Ukrainians would accept. And one of the things that he said was kind of interesting is that, we could probably accept a, lopping off the eastern Ukraine, Donbass, and Crimea, and so on. But what are the security guarantees after that? As long as, as he put it, as long as Putin is around, he's going to continue to pose a threat. So it's a real dilemma. It is a horrible war, and what would be a real tragedy if it were to continue for another 4 years.
We're in a situation where we've got all four of you correspondents who've covered Ukraine, either from the borders inside Ukraine, including you two, and you worked as a photojournalist in Ukraine since the war began. I think I'm right in saying, including during the Battle of Mykolaiv in 2022. Tell us about the fighting then that you saw, and what stayed with you on reporting in Ukraine.
Well, it's a very difficult war to cover. When I was there I think 3 years ago, you had hardly any access to the front lines. The Ukrainian government was still very suspicious of journalists. But it's and you didn't have really access to really the front lines. I was taken on a press trip, and these were like the third or the fourth front lines. Basically, what I understand from colleagues, things are changing now, and you have a little bit more access to what's really happening. But it's a very nasty war. It's a very dangerous war, especially the drones are very scary. And for a photojournalist, in my photo work, I try to capture people, expressions, and then drone warfare is something very automatic, something very robot-like. So for a current day war photographer, these drone wars are very, very challenging.
Joachim, listening to Toon, one thing that strikes me is the what happens next question. I wanted to bring something into you which you will be able to tell us more about, which is this. The Estonian Foreign Intelligence Services brought out its annual security assessment this month. It's been much anticipated because it's considered by many in NATO as the intelligence with the best view of Russia. Their intel says they, quote, do not see any intention on the part of the Kremlin to attack any NATO country this year. And they don't see that changing in the immediacy because NATO, it says, has taken steps to deter Moscow for the time being. Tell us about that Estonian foreign intelligence and why it is so championed within Europe for what it does.
I mean, as much as I speak to colleagues here in Brussels, intelligence people as well, military people, they really value the reports Estonia gives because, we are right there on the border. There's a long history of, we didn't really have this naive view of Russia that they weren't the threat that maybe some of the intelligence agencies in Europe, more to the West, might have had. So there's a long history of looking at Russia, analyzing Russia, and not fear-mongering. You hear from this report that we're not saying that, tomorrow there's going to be an attack, and, we need to kind of, that the world ends unless we completely turn our countries upside down to defense against this. No, it's a rational analysis based on facts, which is why I think it's respected in Europe. And it's the assessment mostly, as much as we've spoken to intelligence people back home in Estonia, is based just on the fact that if you look at the units that Russia has, although they are building a bigger presence on the border with Estonia, on the border with Finland, that they have huge plans to extend their forces there, to focus a lot more on drones, which is very scary for us and for all of Europe, really. We need to be prepared for a Russian army that's supercharged on this experience of drone warfare from Ukraine, the experience that we in Europe don't really have. We need to be prepared for this, and we need to do more to be prepared for this. But we are seeing that as long as they are engaged in Ukraine, there's just aren't the units on the borders with Estonia, with the other Baltic states, with Finland, to actively threaten NATO countries with an invasion. That doesn't mean that the Russians aren't trying to, for example, stage various hybrid attacks on infrastructure, sometimes hidden, spying activities, all other things to kind of destabilize Europe. But then when it comes to, kind of full-scale military war with Russia, it's not in the cards in the near future, just because they are so occupied with Ukraine. Ukraine is really kind of defending our freedom at this moment.
It is a good thought, Joachim. I see the Kremlin marked the anniversary with President Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov saying this, quote, the main goal is to ensure the safety of people who live and have lived in Donetsk and Luhansk, the People's Republic, as well as Zaporizhia and the Kherson Oblast, those who are in truly mortal danger from Ukraine. Those goals of the special military operation have not been achieved. Make of that what you will. To Jalisco State, Mexico, in the early hours of Sunday morning, where special forces raided a rental home in the woods in the remote town of Talpapa, up in the mountains. It's 2 hours' drive south from the biggest city, Guadalajara. 6 military helicopters full of the elite parachute infantry brigade descended, tipped off that the leader of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico, one of the world's most wanted drugs traffickers, was inside. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, a.k.a. El Mencho. The source of that intel is said to have been known because his hideout a source knew one of El Mencho's girlfriends. They followed her and that took them to him. And after a decade in hiding, it came down to a firefight, attempt by El Mencho to escape out the back with his bodyguard. He was found hiding in the undergrowth of the compound where a second firefight was reported. El Mencho and both bodyguards injured. El Mencho fatally was placed on a helicopter, transported to hospital, but confirmed dead en route. Here's President Scheinbaum.
All operations are carried out by federal forces. There is no US participation in the operation. What there is, as we have said here several times, is a great deal of information sharing.
Once the death was confirmed, footage emerged of the cartel's response. Smoking, burnt-out buses, cars, banks, supermarkets, not just in Jalisco, but from coast to coast in at least 20 states. Shootings too, at least 25 members of the National Guard killed in retaliation by the Jalisco cartel. Toon, let's begin with you. You've covered, as you said, the cartels in Mexico, including the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Tell us about El Mencho, who he was, this avocado grower turned drug dealer turned police officer turned cartel boss. Complicated story and an elusive man.
Well, El Mencho, first of all, he was a pathetic killer, but he was able to organize one of the biggest and the most powerful cartels of Mexico. One of the most brutal, one of the most ruthless cartels, a cartel that really confronts the authorities. In an ideal world, the cartels and crime are working under the radar, but they really sought the confrontation with authorities. They shot down an army helicopter with the RPG. They ambushed the head of police in Mexico City with .50 cal with heavy machine guns. They had training camps. They forced recruits to kill prisoners, which were people from other cartels. They did the most gruesome atrocities. Basically, and it's not irrational cruelty, but it's a way of intimidating the enemy and also a way of making a brand. And the Jalisco cartel, they were very smart business people as well. They had some kind of franchise operations. They went to the state next door and they discussed with the local crime bosses from, listen, do you want to join the cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación? You can have our uniforms, our logo, our brand name, and we want just 10% of your profits. And if they attack you, we will defend you. And if we are attacked, we expect you to defend us. And in a couple of years, the cartel Jalisco was able to establish a presence in 20 states of the 32 states of Mexico. And they were involved in, as true narco-capitalists, in kidnapping, in extortion of avocado farmers, but also production of crystal meth, but most important, the production of fentanyl, and that's basically why Trump declared Cartel Jalisco together with Sinaloa cartel as public enemy number one from the US. And this was a very complicated operation, and of course there was a very sensitive relation between the US and Mexico.
Yes.
Of course, in the 19th century, there was the U.S.-Mexican War, but this was done with intelligence from the Americans. The Mexicans could not have pulled this off on their own.
So operational by Mexico, but a lot of intelligence support from the US. A brief point, I know you've extensively looked at you talked right at the start of the key violent cities associated with the cartels that you actually went out in the streets, you spoke to a lot of the crime gangs, Ciudad Juarez, Culiacan, Tijuana. You've explained sort of the spread of this Jalisco as a group, not just to Jalisco, but as you say, to 20 states, hence what we saw with the cars burning and the banks building burning too. What do you expect will fill that void? I mean, how big after the death of El Mencho is this as a victory for the state?
Well, there are basically two possibilities. El Mencho, maybe he had realized he has not the eternal life and he has basically appointed already a successor. Then you have basically a peaceful transition. The other thing is you can have a power struggle and then the cartel can disintegrate in different factions and then it will be very nasty and very bloody. And because you will have new factions and all of these factions have to present themselves to the outside world with atrocious violence, basically as a signal from we are the new kids on the block. And but it can also internal struggle. It can also mean that the cartel will really weaken, and that's what's currently happening in the Sinaloa cartel. This used to be the most powerful cartel after the Jalisco cartel, but El Chapo was arrested, and El Mayo was betrayed by sons of El Chapo. And right now, thousands of people in Culiacan are killed, and the Sinaloa cartel is completely fractionized in different factions. So it's completely weakened. So we don't know what is happening. And I heard about successors, but nobody knows for sure.
Yeah.
I heard today that some lieutenants were killed. So we just have to wait and see a couple of weeks till the ecosystem will become more clear.
And to that point, in a few more weeks, we'll see the World Cup happening this summer in Mexico as well. Inna, just listening to that, I'm minded of the fact President Trump has said this. This is after the operation. He said this: if Mexico doesn't get a grip on the drug cartels smuggling fentanyl across the border, that he remains the right to carry out military action. So there is a sense, really, that pressure hasn't gone away, Inna.
That's right. The pressure is still. Oh, sorry.
No, Inna, go.
Inna, carry on.
Yeah. Yes, about the pressure.
We're listening to you both. Toon, we'll come straight back to you. Inna, you continue. Then we'll get your thought on that to respond to.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say that, the pressure is going on, but at the moment, I think also President Trump, and this topic I will follow, I understand, is very much busy with Iran. So it might also be, the Mexico might be also later his point of interest. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it was your question. Toon, what were you going to say?
The fentanyl epidemic, which has cost the lives of maybe 300 to 400,000 people, has been declared a national emergency. Trump has declared the cartels terrorist organizations. He has declared fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. So basically, this is all creating a context in which he can attack the cartels, but cartels are like very much embedded in Mexican society. They don't have a big skyscraper, a big headquarters where all the cartels are located, and you drop one bomb and the problem is finished. It's a very complicated problem because you have levels at corruption at all levels, at the municipal level, at the state level. And in the past, there are instances that the national drug czar was actually being paid by cartels. So it's a very complicated problem. So it won't be easy to weed it out. But at least Claudia Sheinbaum extradited about 100 narcos that were already imprisoned in Mexican jails. And Sinaloa cartel has declared it's illegal to produce fentanyl because they want to whitewash themselves. So basically, seizures of fentanyl have dropped 50% on the Mexican border.
Wow.
They went up, by the way, on the Canadian border. So the hardline approach of Trump is having at least some results.
Very interesting. Borja, let me ask you a question. What are you making of the timing of the operation, the US pressure we've been talking about, also the intel to this downfall via one of his lovers, apparently?
Well, I think that the timing was opportunistic, based on what I understood and on what I read and heard. The U.S. intelligence sharing has been ongoing for decades. What I found really fascinating was the response of this cartel. This guy, he's been described as Toon pointed out, this guy has been likened by Mexican authorities to ISIS in the level of violence that he's been perpetrating, and also in the cult-like status that he has within this organization. Why would you do that? Why would you have this massive uprising across 20 provinces? I think they were angry, states rather. They were angry because they were basically, as Toon pointed out, they've been paying off these cops. And it's like, but hey, we've been paying you off. How can you come after our cult leader? But I guess the proper response is you were paying off the cops, you weren't paying off the army. But I think that is a really interesting and fascinating development in Mexico.
Well, let's take us from Mexico, thank you, Borzu, to an area that you know very well. Let's go to talk about the situation in Iran. To Switzerland, Thursday morning, 10 o'clock start for indirect talks between the US and Iran, brokered at the residence of the Oman ambassadors to the UN along the shores of Lake Geneva. Widely framed as a last chance for diplomacy, with a huge US military build-up in the Middle East and President Trump's threats of force if no deal is reached on Iran agreeing to diminish its nuclear programme. President Trump has not been exactly clear with what he's seeking. He told protesters a month ago that help was coming, urging them to keep demonstrating before they were crushed and thousands killed in the regime's suppression of dissent. He's talked about wanting Tehran to quit funding its militant proxies and missile capabilities. This is what Israel wants too, with Tel Aviv calling for the US to demand the total package is agreed to.
After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. They're starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again. And are at this moment, again, pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon.
The Economist ran this headline this week. Americans, it said, has no idea what President Trump wants from Iran. The president himself may be among them, and that he might have backed himself into a corner with the military build-up. Bozu, let's start with you. You're born in Imperial Iran before the revolution. Tonight, as we're on air, I think Germany, France, the UK telling its citizens not to go to Israel amongst the possible risk of reprisals. China, Italy telling its citizens not to go to or to leave Iran.
Yeah, I think that it is drifting towards that. I think that it will happen. I think there's now probably way more chance that there will be some kind of military action by the U.S. against Iran. And then the question becomes, what does Iran do? And then what is the escalation after that? Look, this is a very terrible situation, I think. I think that I liken Trump to a guy who, heard that if you go way out into the provinces, there's a furniture store that has furniture on sale. And then he gets out there and he finds out that actually the furniture isn't as cheap as he thought. So he has a choice, sort of a sunk cost fallacy here. He has a choice between driving all the way back with no furniture or getting something at that shop that is not as cheap as he thought it would be. And so I think that is the situation we're in, and that's why the confusion is there. It's like as I wrote in one of my newsletters or something this week, I forget what, but it's a war in search of a strategy at this point. And I think that is a real mistake for the U.S. And it's also going to be potentially really tragic for the region. We're talking Iran as well as Israel that could be hammered by advanced weapons. We're talking potentially in the war last year, there was 1,000 civilian casualties in Tehran, four dozen or so in Israel. So we'll see what happens in the coming hours.
It is worth saying you've been speaking to people, particularly perhaps few people who really know the Iranian level of ability to respond and how it's built up its nuclear enrichment since June last year. Tell me about what you found out.
I don't know about anything about enrichment. I've heard that enrichment has not started up and that the sites have been blown up. They were successfully blown up. So in terms of the nuclear stuff, not a lot. But in terms of conventional capabilities, yes. Iran has been preparing for this round. It knew that was not over. It has not been sitting on its laurels over the last 8 months or so. In addition, China has been coming to the aid. And then there were a few really good reports that I've been reading about how Russia has been secretly and quietly helping Iran out with its anti-missile and intelligence capabilities.
One thing I want to ask you, I listened to the Economist's Middle East reporter, Nick Farmer, who was talking about a quiet civil war going on within Iran. It's saying there's two sides between the royalists and the regime, that it's very tense, but it's bubbling under the surface. It's very hard to know because of so few voices coming from Iran. Do you have contacts? Do you have those?
There are people among the protesters who support the monarchists. I don't think they really know what they are saying. It's just it's the one slogan that really angers the regime is when you shout in favor of Pahlavi. The guy is not a realistic leader for the future of the country. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah or king. So I'm not sure what that is about. I don't know. There's no quiet civil war in the country. There could be if there is a regime collapse.
Listening to that, Joachim, I'm interested to know your thoughts from Brussels. I spoke to the former Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde recently. She said she wasn't against the idea of a US military intervention. What are you picking up in Brussels? Whether President Trump should stick to diplomacy? I see that's one area. Kaja Kallas, former Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Chief in the EU, she said, we don't want another war in the region. Quote, we already have a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think the European idea about this is always kind of, it's a bit mixed. You have some people who are kind of admitting that, I mean, nobody in Europe is a fan of the regime in Iran. Nobody's really a fan of the fact that they've been developing nuclear weapons. I mean, when Trump had this midnight hammer operation where they struck the nuclear facilities, a lot of some Europeans were saying that basically the US was doing, the dirty work for Europe. So there are some voices in Europe who I think are not opposed, like you mentioned, to some sort of intervention. But from the perspective of Kaja Kallas, what Kallas has always been adamant is that she believes that there needs to be, a very rules-based world order. So nobody's above the law, that you don't have unilateral actions from the US, doing whatever they want vis-a-vis Iran, that, if they do decide for some sort of military operation, that you would risk, a wider escalation. Yeah. That would mean we are also drawing attention away from Ukraine, for example, or other issues that we should be dealing with in Europe.
It is a weekend with a lot of pressure and a lot of tense governments and citizens in the Middle East. So that's it for this week. Thanks to another great panel talking to us through another complicated set of global affairs with unique insight and clarity. In the studio with me, thank you to Bozu Daragahi, 3 times Pulitzer Prize nominated independent journalist. In Antwerp, Toon Voeten, award-winning Dutch war photojournalist, writer and cultural anthropologist. From Washington, D.C., we've been joined by Ina Stradzina, foreign affairs editor at Latvian public broadcaster LTV. Thank you, Ina. And to Brussels, we just heard from Joachim Clementi, Europe correspondent from the Estonian public broadcaster ERR. Thank you, Joachim. And thank you for watching. We'll have Kula Shaker send us out tonight as he played at the Café de la Danse in Paris this week, in a week that commemorated the anniversary of the death of John Keats, who died in Rome 205 years ago, aged only 25. In his words, beauty is truth, truth is beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. But in case there's anything else ye might need to know, best see you in 7 days for the world next week.